I'm Helen Phelan, one of the founders of the Deccan Heritage Foundation, and I'm happy to welcome old and new friends to the second lecture of our fourth series of webinars from the Konkan to the Coromandel, a collaborative effort with the Centre for Islamic Studies, Cambridge University, and the Bangalore International Centre. Today's speaker, Karen Ruffle, will discuss the complex role of the millennial city of Haidar, built by Quli Qutb Shah in 1591, connecting ritual action, urban topography, and performance of kingship. Karen Ruffle is Associate Professor of South Asian Islam in the Department of Historical Studies and Study of Religion at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on devotional texts, ritual practice, and Shia material practices in South Asia. Her books are numerous, including Everyday Shi'ism in South Asia, Gender, Sainthood, and Everyday Practice in South Asian Shi'ism. Her current project include a monograph titled Building the City of Haidar, Kingship, Urban Space, and Shia Ritual in Qutb Shahi, Hyderabad, and a large-scale study of South Asian Shia material, culture, and sensorial practices, titled Baraka Bodies, Shia Materiality, the Sensorium and Ritual in India and Pakistan. Before I pass the lecture, I give the lecture to Karen. Let me say that after the lecture, the mediator will be another expert on Hyderabad, Dr. Marika Sardar, and the session will close with Dr. Vivek Gupta's from the Centre of Islamic Studies will close the session, and will also mention the webinars that are forthcoming. Dear Karen, lovely to have you on our webinars, and thank you for all we're going to hear, which I'm sure is going to be fascinating. Right? Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Helen, and all for inviting me to speak today. This is a genuine pleasure to speak about a city that I love so much and has captured my imagination for close to 2 decades. I will share the screen now. What is the meaning of Ḥaidarābād? It may seem odd or a bit off-center to begin my presentation with such a question. You might be thinking, such an obvious question. Why is she asking this? Where is this leading? I do a fair amount of directed or guided questioning in my teaching, and I've spent the last 7 or 8 years deeply asking such questions. What is Ḥaidarābād? Why is it a distinctive place? As the city of Haidar, an epithet for Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, and the first of the Shi'i Imams, the spiritual and political successors after the Prophet's death in the year 632. Beginning in the 14th century, the Deccan was ruled by a series of Muslim dynasties, some of which espoused Shi'ism as their state religion. This was particularly true of the Qutb Shahs of Golconda, Hyderabad, who ruled from circa 1496 to 1687. Some account the dynasty starting in 1518. I choose to begin with 1496. The Qutb Shahs were steadfastly Shia. We can also consider the Adil Shahs of Bijapur, who reigned from 1489 to 1686. There were several of the sultans of the Adil Shahs who also professed a Shi'i orientation. The Muslim rulers of the Deccan Sultanates ruled as religious minorities over their numerically superior Hindu subjects. For these Shi'i sultanates, particularly the Qutb Shahs, these kings ruled as Muslims who were affiliated with a minority community within a larger Deccan melting pot made up of different religious subgroups that we tend to label under the modern rubric of Hinduism, Vaishnavas, Shaivas, Shaktas, and Lingayats. The Qutb Shahi sultans were members of a microscopic elite community ruling over diverse communities of people professing devotion to various gods and goddesses and different expressions of Islam, including devotion to the Prophet Muhammad's family, the Ahl Bayt, and to Sufi saints, the pirs, whose tomb shrines populate the Deccan Plateau. It was in the Qutb Shah's political interest to cultivate these devotional practices and find emotional, material, and ritual linkages to historical memory of the events of the Battle of Karbala in Iraq in the year 680 of the Common Era, and to cultivate love and loyalty for the Imams and the family of the Prophet. More so than the other Deccan sultanates, the Qutb Shahs used the construction of the new city of Hyderabad in the millennial year 1000 Hijri to lay claim to two models of the sacred past, one rooted in the doctrine of the Shi'i imamate, refashioned in an ideology of divine sovereignty in which Ali and Fatima are ancestral king and queen, and the other in establishing a place in the lineage of idealized Dharmic Deccani kings exemplified by the Kakatiyas of Warangal. In the Kakatiyas reigned from 1083 to 1323. Their avid collecting of relics associated with the Imams and Ahl Bayt, which upon their arrival in Hyderabad were bestowed with royal insignia such as the parasol, the Chhatr, or the royal fish ensign, Mahi Maratib. And these were typically associated with the sultans themselves. The display and procession of alams representing and invoking the presence of Ali, Fatima, the Imams, and Ahl Bayt were suffused with royal imagery associated with the Qutb Shahs, thus affirming Hyderabad as the city of Haidar, and the city rightly guided by the Qutb Shahi sultans. In this presentation, I examine Qutb Shahi architecture and material culture from the reign of Sultan Muhammad Quli Qutb Shah as a means of introducing the material archive as a central site of analysis in the study of Shi'i religious history in the Deccan. In the study of South Asian Islam, architecture has not yet been a serious field of inquiry for those of us trained in religious studies. The study of material culture and its practices has only significantly emerged in religious studies, and say maybe in the last 15 years, with increased interdisciplinary and to a lesser extent, transdisciplinary engagements with the fields of anthropology, visual culture, as well as with various aspects of the study of Hinduism, which as a field has been more attuned to the materiality of religious ritual and practice. Scholars of Islam in South Asia and the broader Islamic world have been challenged by a theological, ideological double bind that privileges the written word as well as ahistorical essentialist as an ahistorical essentialist assumption of the unilateral rejection of all forms of figural representation because of the Quranic prohibition against the association of beings or things with God, that is shirk. The material record, however, reveals complex traditions of iconophilia and devotion to image objects, particularly in traditions of Alid devotion, including Twelver Shi'ism. According to our conceptual toolbox, I offer one more model that I shall introduce in two related parts. In Culture and Imperialism, written in 1993, Edward Said's collection of essays that follow up his landmark study of the production of Western knowledge about the colonized world, he examines ways in which the writings of British authors such as Joseph Conrad, Rudyard Kipling, Jane Austen, and others serve to uphold the empire. Said performs a contrapuntal analysis, which takes into consideration the perspective of both the colonizer and the colonized. It reads the imperial prerogative and its resistance simultaneously. Contrapuntal analysis allows us to see how the Qutb Shahs express their Shi'i identity while also invoking Indic idioms of kingship and engagements with material religion particularly relating to Muharram, that tap into a store of subcontinental themes resonant among the region's diverse communities that, quote, and I quote here from Carla Bellamy, that live within the same spiritual economy where similar categories, concepts, and tropes have similar currency. A contrapuntal reading creates space for the multiple identities and theories of kingship that have shaped the new city of Hyderabad. By the reign of Muhammad Quli at the end of the 16th century, the descendants of Sultan Quli Qutb al-Mulk, who emigrated to the Deccan from Hamadan, could no longer be considered Iranian. The Qutb Shahs were fully acculturated to their homeland in the Deccan. Muhammad Quli, like his father Ibrahim, who reigned from 1550 to 1580, was fluent in the vernacular languages of Telugu and Deccani Urdu. According to tradition, Ibrahim married a woman named Bhagirathi while he was in exile in Vijayanagar, who gave birth to Muhammad Quli. Muhammad Quli's world was simultaneously Islamic and Indic, where Persian, Deccani, Telugu, Sanskrit, Kannada, and other languages freely circulated. Late 16th century Hyderabad was Islamic in several ways. It was specifically Twelver Shia because this was the language of its rulers. It was the religion of state. It is based on the fact that Shia living in the region that comprises the Indian subcontinent inhabit multiple worlds. Their religious sensibilities are shaped by Islamic laws and norms, the cultural memory of the events of Karbala, and a South Asian or Indic grammar of religion that animates devotional practices and traditions to the Imams and Ahl Bayt, which I refer to as Indo-Shiism. And I think this term Indo-Shiism is really important. I think it much better captures this particular type of Shiism that's practiced by Shia in South Asia. Muhammad Quli, the fifth of the Qutb Shahi Sultans, together with his Peshwa or chief minister, Mir Muhammad Mumin Ḥaidarābādi, established their vision for a new imperial capital in 1591 across the Musi River at a distance of 4 coasts, each coast measuring about 2 miles. So about 8 miles distant from Golconda Fort, where the air and water had become polluted from overpopulation as early as 1578. So we have reports in the Tariq-e Farishta that during the reign of Ibrahim, Golconda Fort was already overpopulated and the water and air had become quite polluted. This was one motivation for creating a new imperial city. And one moment, please. So we have a report from Farishta in his Gulshan-e Ibrahimi. When the moon was in the constellation of Leo and Jupiter was in his own mansion, Sultan Quli ordered his architects, craftspeople, and masons to build an imperial city that would be unequaled in the world over and would be the replica of paradise itself. And I find this incredibly interesting. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be unpacked in this very brief report that I don't have time to do here with regard to astrology and so forth. But it prompts a number of questions. What exactly is this quote unquote replica of paradise to which Farishta refers in the Gulshan-e Ibrahimi, his history of India's Muslim dynasties? Is Farishta referring to a city modeled on a vision of paradise as described in the Quran? Or is he possibly alluding to another paradisical paradigm? In my own thinking about the city of Haidar, I have stumbled over the many names ascribed to Hyderabad. What does it mean for a city to have multiple names? And this, in many regards, is a site of is sort of a point of contestation. Does such multiplicity refract its Shi'i essence into something less? So into something less Shi'i? According to Zaid Antrim, and I quote, cities were assigned more than one name, and the more names a city could claim, it seems, the better. She notes Medina could claim 10 names, several linked to its pre-Islamic past, others to Quranic designation, clearly suggesting that the multiplicity of names for the city was one of the city's clear virtues. Multiple names and their presence in the textual and material record establishes discourses of space, demonstrating degrees of accommodation of different political and religious agendas. So with regard to Hyderabad, our prehistory starts with the Brahman village located on the site of the new city of Hyderabad, Chichlam, located away from at some distance from Golconda Fort. H.K. Sharwani speculates that Chichlam was located in what is now the old city of Hyderabad in the neighborhood of Sultan Shahi, where Mir Momin built a Karbala ground and cemetery, the Dayara Mir Momin, with soil imported from Karbala, where Shia could be buried for free, mitigating the need to have their corpse transported to Iraq for burial in proximity to the Imams, thus transplacing Karbala to Hyderabad. In the Gulshan-e Ibrahimi, Farishta reports at the beginning of his reign, and now we're moving to the next name. At the beginning of his reign, Muhammad Quli became the lover of a Bazari woman named Bhagmati. When the population increased to such an extent, Muhammad Quli permanently established the capital. Seeing that he named the city for a Bazari woman, after some time, Muhammad Quli felt ashamed and he changed it to Ḥaidarābād. But this change had no effect on the common folk who continued to call it Bhagnagar. In Farishta's account, we hear the story of Muhammad Quli, the inveterate romantic who named the city after a Hindu non-elite woman, Bhagmati. And we all know that, the sort of valorization of Muhammad Quli as, as this romantic, we have the Sound and Light show, we have plays that have been written about Muhammad Quli, the romantic. And so this is sort of this legend that continues. The next account of a name of Hyderabad. Born into a wealthy French family in 1633, Jean de Thévenot spent many of his 34 years traveling through Europe before following his wanderlust to Iran, and later in the place that most deeply fascinated him, India. Thévenot's travels were collected into 3 volumes, the third part titled The Relation of Indostan, the New Mughals, and of the people and countries of the Indies, which chronicled his travels beginning in 1665. Thévenot's descriptions of Hyderabad Golconda dates to the reign of the 7th Sultan, Abdullah, who reigned from 1626 to 1672. So this is after, obviously after Muhammad Quli's reign, but I think it's still relevant. With Thévenot, we receive yet another name for Hyderabad, and I quote from Thévenot. The capital city of this kingdom is called Bhagnagar. The Persians call it Ḥaidarābād. It is hemmed in with little hills, some kosas, as he calls them, but kos, and distant from the town, which makes the air of that place very wholesome. And I end quote. With Thévenot, we are introduced to the city with another name, Bhagnagar, the city of gardens. He describes Hyderabad's many gardens, some planted with palms and areca trees, so near to one another that the sun can hardly pierce through them. And what Thévenot is describing is verified and validated with a contemporaneous author. And this is Ulfati Sauji Yazdi, who in 1642 wrote the Ravaya-e Gulshan-e Qutb Shahi, the fragrances of a Qutb Shahi garden, rose garden, which was composed under the patronage of Abdullah Qutb Shah. The Ravaya is composed in 7 chapters or fragrances, a raya. The Ravaya can be situated in the literary category of Fazail, which extols the merits and positive qualities of a place. According to Sunil Sharma, and I quote, in the early modern age of Persianate culture, when there was tremendous building activity in old cities and new capitals. Poetry praising cities proliferated in many diverse forms, mainly in the verse Masnavi, since it allowed the poet to create a narrative around topographical themes, palace architecture, gardens, bazaars, and individuals inhabiting these spaces are put together in a single imperial frame in multiple ways, as each author privileges some parts over others. Ulfati does exactly this in the Ravaya, extolling the city's palaces, which I do not have time to discuss here, although I do point to the Khudadad Mahal, built in 1610 after Muhammad Quli's daughter, Hayat Bakshi Begum, was married to Muhammad, his successor, who reigned from 1610 to 25, as an example of the city's explicitly Shi'i orientation, with its floors, manazil, named after God on the first, the Prophet Muhammad on the second, Hassan on the third, Hussein on the fourth, Jafar as-Sadiq on the fifth, Musa Kazim on the sixth. The seventh and top floor was named the Haidar Mahal after Imam Ali, which had a roof and pillars studded with precious stones and nails of pure gold. Here, the 7 floors replicate the 7 levels of heaven, I posit. Ulfati likewise praises Hyderabad's extensive gardens. So in the 7th chapter, he describes their flowers and fruits and the heavenly scents they produce. In this 7th chapter, Hyderabad is described, it's extolled as a sacred city and one that is explicitly Shi'i, as in a sense, the city of Haidar. Yet this is a theme that runs throughout the Ravaya. By 1595, the city was fundamentally completed as envisioned by Muhammad Quli and Mir Momin. Its major buildings were constructed, notably the Charminar, the city's free medical hospital, Dar al-Shifa, which was built in 1595, the Congregational Mosque, the Jama Masjid, the Bazaar, and the Badshai, the Royal Ashur Khana, was completed in 1596, with its multiple laudations of devotion to Imam Ali. The Badshai Ashur Khana was the second imperial building built in the new city after the Charminar, with construction beginning in 1592. The Ashur Khana was completed 4 years later in 1596 at the grand sum of 60,000 rupees. Qutb Shahi Ashur Khana's buildings where majlis, assemblies commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussein are held and where alams are displayed during Muharram. These buildings integrate Deccani Indic architectural forms such as the mandapa, the pillared hall or portico in a temple leading to the inner sanctum, the Garbhagriha, where the deity is kept. They have flat roofs in preference to domes. Some have animal imagery on their exterior walls, particularly lions or tigers or buraks. And some display the use of micro-architecture, that is the decoration of a building with a miniature model of itself. The Badshai Ashur Khana is built in the style of a mandapa with a flat roof. The central hall, built by Muhammad Quli, is divided by 4 pillars, as we see here, symbolizing, and so we see there are four niches, or and that symbolizes the Panchtane Pak, the 5 pure ones, Muhammad, Ali, Fatima, Hassan, and Hussein. And so in the eastern courtyard is the royal Nakara Khana, and in the north, and so that's in the eastern courtyard, and in the north and south courtyards we have 2 separate Diwan Khanas, halls of audience. The Ashur Khana is decorated with vibrant painted tile work that was added by Abdullah before he was rose to be Sultan. In this tile work, as we can see here in this photograph, and we'll see more examples in a moment of the tile work, and that was added in 1611. Set among the tiles, we can see examples in the tile work of Paradisical Gardens. So we have here pots, so kalashas, which are very, distinctive of sort of, this is a Deccan style that is sort of a symbol of abundance and auspiciousness. You can actually see this kalasha pot on the minarets at the Toli Mosque in Karwan in Hyderabad, but we have really, we have Tree of Life here. And so we have paradisical gardens of trees and flowers. We have calligraphic bands, which you can see at the top of just this image. We have we have calligraphic bands and roundels containing verses from the Quran, prayers, laudations, and we have also the all-important patron inscription, which is located in the central niche. And within this tugra is inscribed, help from God and a victory nigh. So give glad tidings to the believers. Ghulam Ali Muhammad Qutb Shah, the year 1001 Hijri. And so this Ghulam Ali, so the servant of Ali here, and Muhammad Qutb Shah, this is Muhammad Quli Qutb Shah, that is the reference here is being made to. And so the Quranic verse that we see being referred to is Surah 61, Ayat 13. There are other references to Ali as well. On the western wall, we have Ya Miftah al-Abwab, key or opener of the gates, and then we might make a sort of assume of heaven or of knowledge, and we might if we're thinking about Ali, what might come to mind is the hadith, I am the city of knowledge and Ali is its door. The inscriptional program, and I'm going to return to that hadith at the end of the presentation. The inscriptional program of the Badshāhi Ashar Khana clearly shows Muhammad Quli's devotion to Ali. And while the building's original alams were lost after Aurangzeb's conquest of the city in 1687, and this is understandable considering these alams were made of gold studded with precious jewels. The large central alam, seen here, shows its dedication to Ali as well, with its projecting Zulfikar sword, which we see here in blue, projecting upward, is inscribed with, there is no victory without Ali, there is no sword like Zulfikar, la fata illa Ali, la sayf illa Zulfikar. In the last section of my paper, I turn our attention to the Charminar as a case study to think about the interbreeding of imperial architecture, kingship, and religious identity. While somewhat cursory, my aim is to show the concept of Indo-Shi'ism introduced earlier in this presentation. So how this concept of Indo-Shi'ism will allow us to re-engage the Shi'i vision of the city of Hyderabad through its built space and material culture, and to consider how the Qutb Shahs transformed Shi'ism into an Indian religion through the creative juxtaposition of Shi'i and Indic theories of kingship through the construction of the Charminar, which fuses elements of imperial architecture from Warangal, the capital of the erstwhile Kakatiya kings, with the manipulated resemblance, a shabbi of Imam Hussein's Karbala shrine tomb, the Tazia. We will then, an ethnohistorical method enlivens the texts of the archive, things like poetry, court chronicles, and histories composed in Persian and Deccani Urdu, allowing for a reconstruction of the past, mindful of the limitations of the fidelity of such recreations, or necessarily being able to intuit the motivations for why X, Y, or Z building was built as it was. Through the present, using diverse sources, including interviews, primary and secondary sources in Persian and Urdu, ritual studies, and the analysis of image objects and the built environment. Such a method, which puts the textual and the material archive into conversation, allows for new questions to emerge about the development of Indo-Shiism in the 16th and 17th centuries under the Qutb Shahs. The establishment of a Shi'i paradise in India required a complex mediation of Shi'ism and power in modes that drew from Islamic and Indic modes of sovereign power and religious proximation to stimulate what I term Nazaranic practices of auspicious gazing between devotee and imam, Ahl Bayt, Sultan. The Charminar invokes local forms of imperial architecture and the Shi'i Tazia. The Charminar's hybrid form indicates the extent to which the Qutb Shahs had made themselves at home in their Deccani milieu, where subcontinental ideals of dharmic kingship, which certainly Muhammad Quli's father was exposed to in Vijayanagar, and the material traces of the Kakatiya dynasty located to the north in Warangal, finds echoes in Hyderabad's imperial architecture. Moreover, the proliferation of relics associated with the imams in Ahl Bayt marked Hyderabad as a sacred Shi'i landscape, which conferred another form of legitimacy and power to the sultans as authentically Shi'i dynasts. Echoes of the Kakatiya past proliferate in Qutb Shahi imperial architecture, as Richard Eaton and Philip Wagner astutely observe in their study of the founding of Hyderabad. They note that, and I quote, "They do not appear to have registered this fascination in written form, yet Warangal served as the principal conceptual model for Sultan Quli's new capital." Eaton and Wagner argue that the Charminar is unlike any other building in the Persianate world. They likewise advocate for consideration of the Charminar in the broader context of Deccani imperial architecture. According to Eaton and Wagner, the Charminar is constructed in the form of a chobara, a fourfold house, often found at the center of medieval Deccani cities, marking the intersection of four cardinal avenues. And here is the chobara that you can find in Bidar. While a sultanate architectural form, the chobara draws its inspiration from an earlier indigenous Deccani form, the Kirti Torana, the ceremonial gateway, which is on the left side of the screen from Warangal. Correctly, Eaton and Wagner argue that the Qutb Shahs drew their inspiration not from Safavid Iran, but from the Kakatiyas. Eaton and Wagner make a compelling argument in power memory architecture. However, I think it is one we have to exercise caution in fully accepting because it ignores the Shi'i identity of the sultans, which is clearly manifested in the buildings they prioritized in the construction of the new city, the majority of which had religious functions, ashar khanas for the display of alams and relics and the performance of the majlis, mosques, and the Charminar, which has both imperial and religious function and signification. The Charminar simultaneously symbolizes the Qutb Shah's identity as Shi'i and Deccani. Like other Qutb Shahi era architecture, both imperial and religious, the Charminar suffuses Shi'i symbolism. The Qutb Shahs frequently used number symbolism, 3, 5, 12, and 14, and I would also posit 7 as well, to make materially present the 12 imams, the Panchtane Pak, through symbolic groupings of pillars and arches. Sitting on a north-south, east-west axis, the Charminar is a perfectly square structure with each side measuring 60 feet. Its 4 minarets soar 160 feet from the plinth to the apex, One can reach the upper levels of the minarets by climbing extremely steep stone steps that wind gradually to the top. Along the western side of the rooftop is a mosque imbued even more deeply with Shi'i symbolism. The rooftop prayer hall, Musalla, has 5 double arches symbolizing the Panchtane Pak. According to H.K. Sherwani, number symbolism is further invoked. As one ascends the minarets from the ground floor, one comes across fairly large apartments on each landing, the total number being 12, representing the imams. The interior gallery is decorated with plaster alam motifs inscribed with the names Allah, Muhammad, and Ali. So here we have the number 3, inscribed in fine calligraphy. By 1591, Qutb Shahi alam design was clearly formalized because of its use as an architectural embellishment. And I would argue as a form of talismanic protection, as we see in hospital rooms in the Dar al-Shifa, which is here on the right, is the picture on the right side of the screen. As we note, as we see in both the Charminar and Dar al-Shifa, which is the free hospital built by Muhammad Quli and Mir Momin, the alams take a teardrop or almond-shaped form. For the Charminar, we have the calligraphic inscription in the center. And in the Dar al-Shifa, the center is unadorned. The sharja, beastly figures that project from each side of the alam, are in dramatic relief on the Charminar example. In the Dar al-Shifa alam, we see the sharja as less clearly defined, but it's still there. Whether this is a matter of design or erosion to the object over time, the more likely, this is probably more likely the case, but we don't know. We see similarity in shape to the Charminar prototype. According to Nizamuddin, an alam craftsman, Alam Saz, who was interviewed in 1978 by Mirza Anjem al-Hassan Saab Nuri about the history and meaning of Hyderabadi alams, Mirza Anjem says, the artist wants to make it clear that the sharja, that with the sharja, truth devours evil, just as the dragon is a large devouring creature. And I think here we also have to remember stories about Ali's bravery and associations of Ali with dragons as well. The sharjas on the plaster alams in the Charminar gallery have the fierce dragons projecting from each side with red tongues protruding, which you can see in this picture here. Conforming with Shi'i symbolic language of the Charminar's architectural forms and features is the theory that it is a monumental tazia, which has been debated. And some have debunked it, others have been more willing to accept it. I'm on the pro-tazia side, obviously. The tazia is an indigenous South Asian material cultural form that resembles Imam Hussein's Karbala shrine tomb. A tradition is related in the Tuzuke Qutb Shahi, the Institutes of the Qutb Shahs, a short historical sketch composed of 12 folios that was written in 1858, that is a history of the most famous buildings constructed under the patronage of the sultans, that briefly states that the Charminar was constructed in the form of a tazia. Said Ali Asghar Bilgrami relates that the city's citizens installed an alam in the square to avert a cholera epidemic in 1590. The alam's protective power proved effective, and as a sign of thanks, Muhammad Quli commissioned a monumental tazia, the Charminar, to stand protection over the city's faithful inhabitants. We also see that the chronogram on the Charminar spells Ya Hafiz, one of God's 99 names, meaning guardian or protector, which I think lends further credence to our theory of the Charminar's talismanic role. If we recall, Ali, in his capacity as Imam, is the gateway, protector, and guardian of God's revealed law. As kings, the Qutb Shahs are the inheritors charged with protecting this spiritual and cultural memory. They're also charged with protecting their citizens. And so in a sense, we have sort of both the imams as protectors, but we also have the kings who have this role as guardians and protectors. So I see this sort of responsibility of protecting both spiritual and cultural memory in both its substance and in its formation. And I look to Jan Assmann with regard to what he says about the formation of cultural memory. And he writes, the objectivation or crystallization of communicated meaning and collectively shared knowledge is a prerequisite of its transmission in the culturally instituted heritage of a society. Stable formation is not dependent on a single medium such as writing. Pictorial image and rituals can also function in the same way. We might extend Assmann's concept of how cultural memory forms to include architecture. Located at the center of the city, every citizen could see the Charminar and understand this non-verbal expression of imperial power in which both the Qutb Shahs and the imams compel the gaze and materially invoke idealized vision of both as idealized divine kings. In conclusion, the diverse forms of ritual, which I did not have time to discuss today, ritual architecture and material culture innovated and sponsored by the Qutb Shahs was central to their identity and performance of Indo-Shi'i kingship. The Badshahi Ashur Khana as a site of the spiritual, the Charminar as the site of the imperial, and gardens as a blending of both, were spaces where their vision of Indo-Shi'i kingship was performed, where Ali's presence was invoked through relics, through hand and footprints, and alams that were put on display and taken out in royal procession in Ali's city in the Deccan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that presentation. And it's just interesting to hear more and more parts of your eventual book project on Hyderabad become revealed through these different talks you've given and articles that have dealt with aspects of what you spoke on today. And so we're looking forward to seeing your final bringing together of all these different strands. And I really appreciated how you've sort of brought out different aspects of interpreting the monuments in Qutb Shahi architecture that allow for both this references to Kakatiyas and earlier history of this area that the Qutb Shahis were ruling over, along with the very specific Shia modes of authority as well, and how you sort of wrap that up with the fact that Hyderabad has so many names and that it's known to so many people in different ways. It allows for all of these different associations with the city to exist at once. And so I, coming from the architecture point of view, wanted to ask a couple of questions on that aspect of what you spoke about, and specifically the point about that you made about the Badshahi Ashur Khana and connecting it to a mandap, which I think was quite interesting. Usually I think of that architectural form in relation to a type of architecture, these pillared halls that you see in Greater Iran, but that appear suddenly here in Qutb Shahi architecture at this moment. It wasn't a form previously seen, but it also applied to the tomb of Muhammad Quli Qutb Shah. And I thought it was interesting that it could operate in both these modes, just like you're saying for, just about all the symbolism in the city. So I was wondering if you could expand a bit on that, and then something you didn't address. So I don't know if it's fair to ask this, but something that's always interested me is the positioning of the mosque in all of this. And it's sort of so much more could have been done in this grand processional, I feel, that was built up in Hyderabad between the Charkaman, the Charminar, and the other buildings around. And this is just positioned, off to the corner a bit. It doesn't have a prominent presence there. So I didn't know if that could maybe relate to other things you're thinking about in this Shi'i connection. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I'll start with your last question first, because it's one I've also really struggled with. Why are mosques marginalized? Because they kind of are. The Jama Masjid, I mean, you know where the Jama Masjid is, and it's small. And it's kind of tucked out of the way. And and it seems strange, why is, what would have been the Imperial Mosque, why does it seem in a sense almost like an afterthought? And it's built comparatively late, compared to, what are the first buildings that are built? The Ashar Khana, the Charminar, even the Dar al-Shafas, huge in comparison to the Jama Masjid. And why is the Jama Masjid given much less prominence? And one of the reasons why I think it's given comparatively less focus and attention is because of its, and I don't like using this term, but it's communally specific purpose. That, the mosque is for Muslims, right? It has a very limited purpose. And, whereas, state policy was very open in terms of who could participate in Muharram ritual, and non-Shias were encouraged to participate in Muharram, and so I think that this is one reason why the space of the Ashar Khana, the architecture of the Ashar Khana was in a sense made legible across religious groups, right? Which is also why I think the architecture of the Badshai Ashar Khana, why I guess in a sense I use the word mandapa to describe it, is because it's something that that pillared hall, a Vaishnava could go into that space, and it's something that is comprehensible, just as yes.
I just wanted to say one thing, sorry Marika, but it's that Pushkar Soni actually presented on a couple of weeks ago about the issue of congregational mosques in the Deccan and why there aren't as many as we expect. And his argument was based on legal and Shi'i doctrines that were being established in Iran, contemporaneous with in the 16th century,
right,
which basically forbade the construction of congregational mosques. So that I don't know whether I'm not a true architectural historian, so I think Marika or you could weigh in on this much more than I can. But I just wanted to put that out there because it relates to exactly what you were yeah, However,
we don't have mosques not only during the Sultanate period, but before. You know, when you have during the Bahmani period, you have one mosque in Gulbarga, small mosques usually associated with specific shrines. And when you think that Bidar has only one mosque, congregational mosque, it is quite amazing. When in the rest of the Islamic world, each sultan built a mosque. So there is, I tend to agree with what you're suggesting, Karen. And the reason also that in fact it is the Sufi shrines that became the great centers where the interaction between Muslims and non-Muslims takes place is another place where, because it is open to all possibilities, it attracted Hindus, non-Hindus, so it suited better. And I think I'm, you know, for me, what you're saying makes a great deal of sense. You know, and I agree as well that in fact what you see at the Badshahir Shulkhane, it is a mandapa, because you have similar buildings already in the successor period. You know, so it's something that is there, and it's copying or it's trying to include elements that belong to the local traditions with the others that are important. This way, making their presence more acceptable. You have it not only in India, but you have it also in Ottoman Turkey, where in fact, you know, you had Sufi shrines who became the place of actually where in fact non-Sufis and Christians and Muslims came together because the Sufi shrine adopted the number, you know, the mark of God, etc., the Bektashis, for instance. So this helps to accommodate Islamic beliefs within a foreign context. So I tend to.
I mean, I agree that it could be a mandapa, but at the same time, I think that it also has Iranian things happening in it just because of, no, I mean, specifically because of how tall those columns are. I mean, they're quite thin columns. You know, if we were thinking mandapa, you would expect more blocky, you know, especially in this region. So that's, I mean, it could be both is one solution.
One doesn't can't be the other.
I think we tend to, you know, be very either or, and I think
I think I agree with you. I think it's both, and that's what's so wonderful about the Deccan, that everything coexists. And I think that you know, this way you accommodate all beliefs. I'm really very I agree.
I mean, this is why I think that the Charminar is a really, I mean, I think it's a fusion of styles. I mean, and I know there are people who will disagree with me. I think we can look at the Qutb Shahi tombs. They're also a fusion of styles, because the Qutb Shahs were, you know, I think they were integrating two different modes of sovereignty.
Yes, which all the others did as well.
Yeah.
You know, that's not surprising. And we do it much more in the Deccan than elsewhere, I think. Perhaps Bengal is another place where, in fact, this also might be happening. But anyway.
So just one more point on this topic, which has come in from Renu Parak. She has asked if the influence was more from Mandapa and Warangal and less from Safavid. What kinds of artisans were involved in the construction of this building and it's doing the tiling and so on? Is that something you've thought about, Karen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I also want to make it really clear, I'm not an art historian. I'm coming at this from a religious studies perspective. So I'm really asking sort of more religion, like questions of religion about these spaces and sort of the layout of the city and the objects. So in terms of like craft, I mean, that would be sort of more Marika and Vivek's task, and sort of that's, I guess, not what I'm asking. So you know, thinking about what the inscriptions are saying and the work that they're doing, I'm really interested in that and trying to sort of map out. So what's you know, what are all of, these, these threads about Ali doing in this city? Why are there so many relics that sort of come to Hyderabad? What is this? Why is this happening? What is this doing? What is the cumulative effect is sort of what I'm thinking about. Does that make sense, Renu?
It does to me, and fair enough. And thank you for addressing that. And then I guess to your point, there is a question dealing more specifically with your area of specialty, and I'll just encourage everyone to keep putting questions in the chat as we read the next one out and get your response. Someone has asked, are there tazia made of ephemeral materials that are immersed as in some other places? If so, can you provide any background on the Shia practice of immersion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know who iPad is, but my question, so I just want to ask one really quick follow-up question. So yes, there are, so Tazia, Hyderabad doesn't, as far as I've been able to learn, Hyderabad is an alam city, right? I mean, the culture that we have in Hyderabad is of alams, and not really so much of taziyas, although we have description, mention of taziyas during the reign of the Qutb Shahs, and then it seems to die out probably after 1687. And this is, sort of a practice that just never comes back, is what I'm hypothesizing. There are a lot of practices. I mean, this is where, regional specificity, there aren't there aren't practices that we have to be really careful when we talk about, Shi'i culture and Shi'i practice, because, well, we talk about alams, alam design, alam motifs, are Deccani alams are very specific. If you go to Karachi, you go to Lucknow, you'll see very different, sort of programs of design with regard to alams. Tazia designs, tazia practices are, if you go to Mumbai or Lucknow or Karachi or Lahore, they're very different. There are different types of tazia. So there are ephemeral tazia, there are permanent tazia, and permanent tazia are sort of known as zari. So if you go to Lucknow and you go to the Bara Imambara, or Shah Najaf, for example, the beautiful, silver work zaris that you see inside, those may be taken out. Those are often displayed throughout the year. And those, will not be immersed. A smaller sort of zari, will be put inside, and that will be immersed. But the large, this large permanent tazia will not be, because it's expensive and beautiful. And so there are different types of permanent tazia that, might be carved from wood or other materials. Chiniot in Pakistan is very famous for its multi-story tazias, but ephemeral tazias are often, constructed out of bamboo frames and then covered with paper or flowers or other types of, inexpensive materials, and those are displayed, could be displayed at home, could be displayed in a neighborhood, and then on Ashura they're taken out in procession, and so those are immersed. So in Hinduism, that practice of immersion is called Visarjan, and the purpose of immersion is to cool, right? So there are many reasons why this practice of immersion is done. So to cool the power, right, that builds up in the tazia, So to release, there's, there's the belief for many Shias that Imam Hussein or Hazrat Abbas, or, inhabits the Tazia during the Ashra, during the 10 days of Muharram. And so the immersion releases that presence, so that next year during Muharram, the next year, that that presence can return again. So that practice of immersion is also known as Tanda Karna, so to cool. So yes, there are different ways it can. So immersion can happen in a Karbala ground, so in a burial ground. So ephemeral tazia can be buried. They can be in the earth. They can be immersed in water. There are different ways in which that immersion can be performed. And so this is the subject of an upcoming project called, so the larger project, so it has sort of two working titles. One is Baraka Bodies, and the other is Presence Absence and Object Agency in South Asian Shi'i Materiality. And so there are two book projects that I have going for that project as well, and that will be based on field work in both India and Pakistan.
Thank you for that response, and also pointing us to forthcoming research on that specific topic. And I just wanted to note that there is this wonderful resource about sort of practices during this time of Muharram and so on, with this text, the Hadikat Salatin, written during the period of Abdullah Qutb Shah, and that I know you make extensive use of in other parts of this work. And if I may just ask one final question, you in something you published previously sort of pointed to the fact that we are hesitant to think of sort of Qutb Shahi practices sort of paving the way for Shias perhaps elsewhere, that we think everything must come from Iran and the Safavid state towards India, since that was the larger and more dominant sort of power at the time. And I was wondering if you had seen evidence, since we know quite a bit in detail at different moments in the Qutb Shahi period of what is actually happening. Have you seen practices move in reverse? I thought that was a very interesting suggestion there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a really good example is actually with regard to alams, right? I mean, we definitely, have evidence of, the design of alams, moving from the Deccan to Iran, right? So the Sharjah, for example, that there's influence of, the dragon motif, moving from the Deccan and influencing Iranian alams. I think that we have this tendency to always, assume that, there's it's Safavids who influence, the Deccan sultanates. And I think that there's, there's always that assumption that, in a sense, the Deccan sultanates are derivative of Safavid Iran. And I think we have to be really careful of that, because, I think that there was a much clearer sense of Shi'i identity, especially with regard to devotional practice in the Deccan before, the Safavids had, sort of crystallized any sense of Shi'i identity in Iran. And we have this, I think, that's something we have to kind of step back from, and we have to just always remember, there was flow of movement that, people were moving back and forth, back and forth. That meant Deccani ideas were going to Iran as well. Deccani practices were going to Iran as well. And so, you know, Iranians were also influenced by Deccanese. And so I think that we, you know, we have, and I think that the Qutb Shahs were very, you know, comfortable with who they were as, you know, as Deccanese. And so I think it's something that we just have to be attentive to. And, you know, and I know that there's resistance to that. And so I think, you know, if we, you know, we just have to, you know, I think look carefully at, you know, what's happening with spaces, and we can say, why not both? Right. And yeah, we can look at, you know, Iranian architecture and say, yes, like there are definitely design elements from Iran, but there are definitely design elements coming from the local environment as well. I mean, if you look at, and of course, not every mosque in the Deccan, but you look at a lot of Deccani mosques, they don't have big domes, right? I mean, there are reasons for that. They don't have huge minarets for the most part. You know, I mean, I think it's not everyone. I'm making that clear. It's not everyone.
Well, on that note, please join me in thanking Dr. Marika Sardar for managing the questions, and Professor Karen Ruffel for this fantastic lecture. We are sticking with Hyderabad in our next session. So for all you Hyderabad aficionados, we expect you in attendance. Our next event is on May 6th at 1 p.m. London time. So it's an hour earlier than this lecture, which is really hard for our American audience, but maybe a strong cup of coffee would do. And the title is Eclipsed by the Moon, Mahalaka Bai and Kushal Khan Anup in Nizami, Hyderabad. And it will be delivered by Catherine Butler Schofield from King's College, London. So on that note, I wish you all a pleasant Friday, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.